Hey Woo lovers, Lee from straightwoo.com here, and doing first and perhaps a series, let's see, about Ask Me Anything. Ask the astrologer your questions answered. I get tons of questions into my inbox or as comments on the blog or as replies to newsletters and things, and I don't always have the time to reply to those, but I thought it'd be fun to start answering some of them on video format. First of all, because you'll get your answer, but second, because it'll serve the whole community at the same time. And I've got, my kind of idea of how I'm going to do this is to do 3 questions per session based on what you guys sent me. I've got tons now in the queue of questions to answer. In this first group, they all tend to do with retrogrades and Mars. I've gotten some questions over the past month or so about Mars and Mars retrograde, which started, I should say, June 26th, and it lasts till August 26th. We're somewhere near the middle. In fact, we're very near the middle because we're almost near the Mars opposition, which is the halfway point of a Mars retrograde. And so I'm going to answer some of these questions for you guys. So let me know in the comments, do you like this? Do you want more of it? Subscribe. I don't know which way the thing is. It's one of the sides. And let me know what you think. So the first question is, I guess I have a question for you while I'm here. I'm curious about your thoughts about starting something new, such as a new job or romance. Well, Mars is in retrograde. Yes, it is. Mercury is about to go into retrograde. It will. That's on July 26th. And Venus will be going into retrograde too, which is also true, but that doesn't start until later in the fall. Should we just hunker down and go within for the next 4 to 5 months? No. In a word, no. Firstly, because life is for the living. Life must go on. Astrological transits be damned. I also think, I actually was really excited to answer this question because it addresses a few different things that I really feel about astrology and how, not just how important it is, but the place we give it in our lives is very, very important. In essence, there's something along the lines here of what you don't master masters you. But said better by a Confucianist writer in the 18th century. I've often reflected on this quote. The student should know the difference between putting things to work for oneself and being encumbered by things. So similar to what you don't master masters you. I don't really like the application of astrology is that, that it's you're a slave to it or you can't make decisions without it supporting your decisions or reading into it. I certainly don't work that way. I do not look at my own astrology every day. Even this, we're in a Mars retrograde right now. I'm trialing something new for my business. Is this technically the best time to start things like that? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't think we should ever limit our life decisions and choices based on what astrology says. If you have the impulse to do something new, to try something new, if a great job is there waiting for you, if a promotion is in the offings, if you need to buy a house, if you want to buy a house, if you have to move, if you need to move your children to a new school, those are already difficult things. I don't know if then the somewhat neurotic application of astrology on top is really helping anything. I don't really think it does. If anything, and this is something to know too. I will talk about this a lot more. I think on the Mars opposition to Sunday, which will be July 27th or 28th, the planets don't affect you, they reflect you. And that's something really important to understand. It's not like Mars or Mercury or Venus has like laser gun with batty rays, and as soon as it goes retrograde, it's like, coming for you. No, the process that unfolds during these retrogrades, it's one of reflection. The planetary transits that I can see or a professional astrologer can see in your chart, it doesn't only dictate what happens to you, it's what is happening through you. It's a slightly different framework, but it does change the game. Other things that are useful to think about. You may be getting into astrology now. You may be studying it. You may be reading horoscopes. You may just be an amateur lover of astrology, wherever you are in the journey. You may be new to astrology, but astrology is not new to you. Astrology has been happening your whole life. Mars retrogrades have been happening your whole life. Venus retrogrades have been happening your whole life. There's 3 or 4 Mercury retrogrades every single year. And they haven't caused you to have a breakdown every single time or have horrible things happen or, disallow you from making life choices or to moving forward. And it's also very true. Maybe you could, now knowing what you know about astrology, you might be able indeed to look back at a job that you started during a retrograde period that didn't go well for you and say, oh, well, yeah, Mars was retrograde during this period. Mercury was retrograde during this period. This is an explanatory symptom of what went wrong. And that is possible. But I am the person who I've bought a house in Mercury retrograde as a professional practicing astrologer, knowing that that was happening. Yes, I think it could be better to plan certain big decisions around days where the astrology supports it. But even this, I know somebody's asked this kind of question too. Should I get married on days where the astrology is good or bad? Or, the kind of idea of electing astrology behind a wedding date. I got news for you. Even if you get married if you choose the day that has the best ever astrology, it might make your party easier and more fun. But if you have a crappy marriage to start, you'll have a crappy marriage in the end. It won't matter that the moon was in the 5th house or Venus was trining, whatever. These are really like breadcrumbs or like these are nothings in a way. So that's another thing that I always think. Adding on to that, another thing to play with in your mind if you're new to astrology and trying to understand how to use astrology in a way that's empowering. In the West, we have a particularly linear way of thinking about time, which is that something starts, it goes until it finishes. It's like dot, dot, the journey in between. It's finite. There's a distinct starting and finishing point. That is linear time. It moves in one track forward, and that is it. It finds its end, and that's it. And that is how many people think about a Mars retrograde. It started June 26th. It goes until August 26th, I believe it is, off the top of my head, and then it's done. I don't know, because transits are about the unfolding of oneself. Again, this idea of what's happening through you. The planets are reflecting, not affecting, reflecting a process of unfolding that's happening through you. So it is very possible to go through a Mars or a Mercury retrograde that does not necessarily make a huge impact immediately, but impacts the next several years of your life. Let's say you've got Mars retrograde in the 10th house. You're making really big adjustments in how you feel about work, the energy you have it, your ambition, your drive, why you're doing it, how you're doing your things at work. That transit may only last 2 months, but the effects of that transit may last 2 years. So that's another thing to free yourself up from. And, in that way that transits are, yes, they are linear in the sense that there is a moment that Mars station retrograde, and there's a moment specific in time that Mars stations direct. But the impact of retrogrades on the life are not finite, and they're not terminal, and they do not have a natural starting and ending point. Maybe the churning up of certain energies feels like it has this kind of waxing period that crescendos and then decrescendos down and then stops. But that's human life is much more nuanced than that. Why we make decisions we do, the unfolding of the personality, the ways that we progress as people have a much more non-linear journey. So these are some of the things that I think of when I think about this question. I know that's like you were asking probably more things like, should I start a new job? Brass tacks, it is common theory to say no. Don't start a new job. Don't sign on the new apartment. New romances started in retrogrades won't bode well. But I instead would just welcome you to, again, think about they won't go as you think they will. I've had fabulous things happen during Mercury retrograde because things happened better than I would have thought or different than I would have perceived or hoped. So that all these things are very possible. I think with a Mars retrograde, what you really have to worry about is more that the things that are important for you now and kind of fueling the engine now may change because all of that is being churned up for discussion. Mercury retrograde has much more trickster energy. It's about frustrating us just enough that we sit back and we're more reflective. And we are, instead of being in this, again, very Western, linear, pragmatic, logical left brain mindset that just like jumps on the escalator and goes, Mercury retrograde kind of gives us or gifts us the ability to be slightly more reflective and to take our brains off that kind of pattern and path, just so we can be a little bit more in tune with other impulses and other things. Maybe it's our body, maybe it's our emotions, and hopefully it helps us bring those things into one plane so they're all moving at the same speed together instead of just the mind or just the heart. You know, in shamanic wisdom, it's when all these things are working together and moving forward. Venus retrograde is also, you know, supposedly not great for romances and starting new romances, but I've known many people that went back to old relationships with great success during a Venus retrograde, or somebody they went on a date with and it didn't work out very well, but they got back together. People from your past, that's always a good thing. Sometimes Mars and Venus retrogrades both will, even Mercury, will churn up stuff from the past for closure. And so that can be really healing too. And the last thing I want to say here is, you know, should we just hunker down and go within for the next 4 months, 4 to 5 months? Again, my baseline is no, life is for the living. You got to get out there. There's no way to control life, even using, you're the best astrologer in the world. There's no way to control life enough that you won't have pain or disappointments or screw ups or make the wrong decisions. And pains, screw ups, and wrong decisions have just as much good in them as bad. So I know I've gone, as always, long and strong, but that was a really interesting question to me because it's not just about do you or don't you. Once you get past the immediate, there's a deeper level there of philosophical thought. And something I've always thought is that astrology is an empty vessel. It's a structure about planets and aspects and houses and whatever, but it's an empty vessel or structure, and you can animate it. Anima, coming from the Latin for soul. You can ensoul it, animate it with anything you want. You can put crappy stuff in it, it will run. You can put great stuff in it, it will run. But it's up to you how you use astrology. And what I hope always to offer is this kind of balance, and is this desire to, even from my own self, I love having these kind of conversations, to have a different kind of conversation about astrology, not just like, don't sign any contracts. So that is that question done, in my opinion. Moving on, a very Mars question. What's the best way for a woman to handle a moon conjunct Mars in 2 or 3 sentences, Lee? Anybody that knows me knows I'm not going to do this in 2 or 3 sentences, but I will give you 2 or 3 examples. I believe you have this too. Yeah, I have the moon conjunct Mars in Scorpio. It's bad. Mine is in Taurus. Better for you. My moon is being slammed by retrograde Mars. Thank you. You are so welcome. So it is true that if you have planets in early fixed sign, late cardinal sign, so early fixed sign would be 0 to 12 degrees of Taurus, Scorpio, Leo, Aquarius. Late degrees of cardinal would be, I'd say like 23-ish degrees until the end of Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, Libra. This retrograde is coming for you a little bit more than it is for other folks. And for sure, if you have Moon and Mars getting together in this retrograde, it's going to be tough sometimes. So yes, I do have Moon conjunct Mars. Mine is Mars retrograde in Scorpio. I'm going to talk a little bit first about what it means to have Moon conjunct Mars, and then give you a sense of how to work with it, because I think that's what you're really asking. It's not actually as bad a placement as one would think, given what's written online about this kind of aspect. So I'm really pleased to answer this and give a more balanced, nuanced view. First thing is to know that the reason why planets get along or don't get along is down to many things, but in most basic sense, it's something called temperament. And temperament was kind of this idea that based on the planet's distance from the sun, there would be more or less heat or more or less humidity or moisture. So you take a planet like the moon, which was supposed to be kind of cold but temperate because it would receive some warmth from the sun, as you know, the sun and moon had this reflective thing going back and forth between new and full moon every month. And it's also supposed to have moisture. In fact, a lot of ancient Greek myths, I'm trying to think of anybody who's done my moon cycle course probably remembers this better than even me, but some of the ancient moon goddesses were said to have left dew on all of the vegetation when they were kind of going through the sky in the night sky. And that was supposedly the reason we would wake up with dew on the grass and on all of the vegetation. There was this idea that it was up to the moon, that the moon was not just pulling tides, but that it was also having this exchange with the earth back and forth about moisture, and that it was life-giving for that reason, that it had fertility. The moon was quite often associated with fertility, vegetation, water, rain, things like that. Mars, on the other hand, was said to be hot and dry. Arid, hot, dry. So you have a planet like the moon that's temperate and moist, and then you've got Mars, which is hot and dry. So when they come into contact, basically Mars splits asunder the moon. The moon's natural position as being fertile, life-giving, full of moisture and warmth, and enough warmth to be life-giving. And it kind of like burns it up. It dries it out, sucks all the moisture out, and it heats it up and makes it inclement for life, inclement for vegetation or for fertility. Sometimes when Moon and Mars are together in the fifth house, it can create tough situations around fertility. But there's a lot to be said that's good about a Moon-Mars conjunction, and my thoughts on this are threefold. I will give you three examples. Number one is Mars is drive and ambition, but it's also penetrative, brave, courageous. It's the part of our personality that potentially stands up and fights our corner when we need to. So Moon conjunct Mars, the one thing I want you to think about is to really appreciate your emotional bravery. Appreciate that. It's probably something that a lot of Moon conjunct Mars people don't think about, because the normal thing that's written about this aspect online is that it's anger, frustration, rash, kind of impulsive, hot-natured sensibility for the emotions, that you might boil over easily, that you're going to be very reactive, that there's this kind of like tit-for-tat thing that happens, that you might be very piercing and really tough on people emotionally, both on yourself and on others. So there is this sense of like a hot, choleric, livery, like bilious attitude that's supposed to come out in the emotions. But the real upside here is an emotional bravery. Moon Mars people usually are brave. They're emotionally brave. This can come out as I will ruthlessly look at myself and my emotions and what's going on in my life and try to face it. Or it can come out as I'm unafraid to show my emotions, unafraid to have them and to display them. And I don't care what anybody else says about the fact that we should be hiding them or keeping them under wraps. Moon Mars people tend to be like out here with their emotions, like almost leading with them. So I want you to respect the fact that you have a lot of emotional bravery here, that not everybody else has that. It could be something that you're very easily taking for granted, because aspects to the moon tend to be things that are so much a part of ourselves and our being and our way of function that they can even be blind spots. The sun and the aspects tend to be things that we lead with, and we kind of very consciously identify with. Moon aspects tend to be more close to the chest. So there's that. with that, I'd say respect the fact that other people don't have that. Moon Mars people in relationship, for example, are the ones that are able to say, this is not working. We need to talk about this. Things are not going the right way. And kind of like there is that penetrative, piercing sense of like, if there's an emotional field or a barrier, I need to get in there, kind of rip it open and see what's in there to suss it out. Other people don't necessarily have that sensibility, and one thing that you could help you over time is to know that and to not push people. Mars is driven, it is a bit pushy. Don't push people that way. Let them, with their own pace and speed, come to that place. You don't have to prod them with Mars's sword until they're like on the brink of the cliff. Let them take their own pace with things. Number 2, I'd say be thankful that you can fight back, especially you've identified yourself as a woman, especially as a woman. Moon Mars can be amazing for having a natural sense and a reserve of that if people get too close and your boundaries are too transgressed, wham, there's something that comes back. It's not always pretty. Again, I have the moon conjunct Mars. I know this problem. So, it's not always pretty, but be grateful that you have that. Be grateful that you have the backbone and the ability and the energy to fight back and to kind of fight your own corner, to back yourself in that way. It's a very important thing. The flip side of that, I'd say, is pray for a pause button. I've stolen this from one of my good friends who is the most peaceful, placid person you've ever seen in your life. You wouldn't believe for a second that she's had issues with anger or had problems with anger, but she has. And this is one of her famous sayings. She said, when I would ask her, how have you dealt with this? What is the thing that's worked for you? She'd say, I literally would pray for a pause button, because Moon Mars is a bit like, again, tit-tat, like input-output, very reactive. So one thing you can do with Moon Mars, whether it's happening, it's in your natal chart or it's happening by transit, just pray for the pause button. If something comes in, just breathe, wait for a moment, wait to react, because Moon Mars also usually goes, I say I have it in Scorpio, so Scorpio is much more likely to go for absolute jugular. Moon Taurus, as you seem to have it, not as bad, but on very intense signs like Aries or Scorpio, even Capricorn, Moon Mars is going to be really cutting. So just pray for a pause button. Just 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3. What the hell is bothering me? Family Matters, circa 2001. I think so. The last point there is liver. The shamanic world, anger, which is really going to be one of the primary ways of relating with Moon Mars, is in the liver, stored in the liver. So I'd say eat light, lay off meats and cheeses and heavy food, lay off drinking. Moon can sometimes be our body. Moon Mars together can sometimes result in things like skin eruptions, inflammation, psoriasis, eczema. Those are some of the really common ones. Anything kind of inflammatory, fevers are a big one. Heat, because that's Mars's heat. So that is some stuff that I would say there. I would also say, just as an overall thing, anger is one of the hardest emotions for people to accept. And we really need to get better at divorcing anger from rage. Rage has no agenda. It's quite ruthless and damaging, and it is an indulgent emotion. Rage just seeks to indulge itself and to empty the container. It doesn't matter where it lands. Anger is very different, because anger has a clarity and it has movement. For example, for me as a counseling astrologer, I would find it not easier per se, because that starts to give it a qualitative or judgmental or a value of sorts that can be assigned good or bad. But it is perhaps easier to work with somebody who's in a state of anger then a state of denial or repression, or guilt or shame. Guilt and shame and those other things kind of keep us stuck and rooted, and possibly rooted in things that are really not good for us, feelings that are not good for us, things that are perhaps not productive. They can still be helpful, but maybe not productive. Anger is a moving energy. It tends to galvanize us into something, to make us rip past boundaries or borders. There can be fantastic things that come out of expressing anger, but anger is one of the hardest things for us to express in the modern Western world. It's the thing we dislike the most in other people. Hence why you even see like big athletes and things today, they don't get angry on the field, they cry. If any of you have been watching the World Cup, those boys cry. They don't get angry. Why? Because angry is a shameful way to express emotion. So also yes, exercise and meditation could help almost anything. They will help Moon Mars. They will help that kind of livery condition. I think any kind of controlled way that you can find to release Mars-like martial energy. Some people do things like kickboxing. That can work. Boxing, I'm not that way inclined because I'm Cancer rising. I just want to be at home on the sofa. But I do meditations where I'll go deep into a place of anger and really gun it in that place. And that really, really helps me because then I get to feel the anger and I get to express it. I'm not trying to repress it. I'm not trying to deny it exists. Sublimating the energy of anger into movement can be helpful, but sometimes we're just angry. So these are some of my thoughts. I hope that helps. If you've got Moon Mars in your natal chart, or you're experiencing it by transit right now. Last question, and this one will be a little bit shorter than the others. Wondering, are there any similarities between Mars retrograde in general and Mars in the 12th house? Speaking in terms of energy, where there's a lack or block for more direct energy of Mars. Okay, so if you're new to astrology, astrology charts have 12 slices of the pie, or 12 houses. In fact, just for illustration purposes, in case you are new to astrology, this is what an astrology chart looks like. So you can see that these are 12 different slices of the pie. These are 12 houses. And essentially, although this is not the right kind of chart to show you exactly what I would need to, is that the sun rises in the east on the ascendant, or that's where daybreak would be, but it's the horizon line is the ascendant-descendant axis. And bizarrely, the sun rises at the horizon, continues to rise through the first house, and then rises into the 12th. And this is important because the 12th house distorts the planets that are found there, or hides them, or eclipses them from view. And the reason why we have that understanding is because the sun rises over the ascendant from the first house into the 12th, and this burning rays of the sun eclipses anything that's near it. So even if the sun was to rise and Mars was near it, by the time sun gets above the horizon, Mars disappears in the sun's rays. You can't see it anymore. Hence, if you have, or it's near enough to the horizon or the sun, either or, the sun more or less eclipses anything 15 to 17 degrees either side of it. It's quite a wide barrier. So that is where we get this idea that in the 12th house things are hidden, eclipsed, or distorted, because in fact any stars or planets there are hidden, eclipsed, or distorted by the sun's rays as it would naturally move into that house. Now, the 12th house is a tricky place. The 12th house, although it's really quite often euphemistically referred to as a place of transformation, in a lot of modern astrologers, that would be transformation hard won by really crappy stuff. It's not eat, pray, love my way to transformation. I have also written elsewhere, and I really believe this, that transformation is too great a topic to be one house. I think every house has a transformative possibility. The 5th house of children. Anybody that has children knows that their lives have been transformed by children. in the experience of having them or not having them or what have you. It is a transformative experience. That does not mean that the 12th is more or less transformative, simply that it has a different way of bringing that energy about. So the 12th, some of the things that are the themes of the 12th are hidden enemies, again, for the same reason, the idea of hidden or distorted things. Patterns of the subconscious or the self-undoing that we can't see. So our blind spots, our addictions, again, those subconscious patterns that kind of run, that we're unaware of, that we can't really put our finger on and sort out very directly. The 12th is anything where we are hidden away from the world. So hospitals, retreats and ashrams do kind of sit here, although they are slightly more ninth house. Institutions, incarcerations, prisons. This is the house of the bad daemon, the house of the self-undoing. There's a lot here that's heavy. So I just want to say all of that up front anyway, because it's great for people to know in case they're new to astrology. But Mars in the 12th will speak more about, by sign and aspect, where you have those patterns of undoing. And then the houses ruled by Aries and Scorpio in the chart are naturally connected to the 12th by that placement. So that's a more advanced way of answering that question. There is a sense that when Mars is retrograde in the natal chart, it's more about the drive and the ambition, even the libido, even the sex drive, is inhibited in some way. It may have been blocked early on. Another thing that's sometimes said about Mars retrograde, and I've written about this for astrology.com, so you can Google that, astrology.com, Mars retrograde. It should be one of the first results that comes up. But Mars retrograde can sometimes suggest having a father or animus figure that did not teach us the appropriate way to build action from intention and will to doing and accomplishment. Another thing that's often said about any retrograde planet, it's like you're trying to drive somewhere, but instead of in the car driving forward, you are driving backwards, trying to use your rear view mirror to get there. It's just a clunkier, more difficult path. I think Mars retrograde also, I always associate it also with possibly depression sometimes, although that's sometimes, that's often considered a Saturn moon thing. But in so much that Mars does connect with the part of us that can be frustrated or angered, and in so much that anger that has nowhere to go quite often can manifest as depression. That's something that happens. I also think about, we might have a hard time like identifying the things we want and going after them in a kind of clean way. There might be, the path might be a little bit more squirrely, for lack of a better word. So that's really what Mars retrograde is like. I think Mars in the 12th, it's more about the houses ruled by Aries and Scorpio and how those relate to the 12th. So like, let's say you've got Aries ruling the 5th and Mars is in the 12th. Got Aries on the 5th house, or for some of you that use Placidus, I don't, but 5th house cusp, and Mars in the 12th. That would connect the space of children, sex, romance, love, creativity, risk. Games of risk and gambling are there too, with the 12th house, the house of self-undoing, the house of subconscious, of addictions. Have I known many a person with 5th house rule in their 12th to have fetishes and kinks, like a real kink fetish thing that they need to do and need to express? Yeah. But it doesn't get wholly, maybe it's something they only do in certain circumstances, or they don't really feel comfortable talking about out there. It could be that we have a pattern related by Mars sign and aspects that somehow contributes to our self-undoing, or that there's some kind of unbeneficial relationship between these two houses, that kind of thing. So I think I never want to conflate Mars retrograde in the natal chart with Mars in a particular house, because I think that is too much a leap. I will agree, because I think I know where you're getting at. yes, it is possible for a Mars retrograde, which is a Mars that is somewhat eclipsed or hidden or distorted, to feel somewhat similar to a Mars in the 12th house, which is a Mars, a drive and ambition, a will that is eclipsed, hidden, or distorted. But not so much. You know, these are very different things. Mars in the house versus Mars as its solar phase. Very different things. But I will concede that I think there's a similarity, but in actual interpretation, they would come out very, very, very different. You know, Mars retrograde in the 10th house may give somebody a real fight and a punch and a verve for career. And in their reputation, they may be seen as somebody that's quite Martian, that's quite tough and intense and goes for what they want. They could be considered quite a go-getter. And it may, again, with Mars retrograde, it may come out in like weird little bursts. Like it may not come out smooth and simple. It may come out kind of erratically. That is another Mars retrograde thing. But Mars in the 12th is quite different. So I hope I've answered that sufficiently. But yeah, that's it, my friends. Long as always, but now that I know, just remember, guys, you are the ones that said you like my long videos, so you did it to yourself. Months from now when you're suffering, because all my videos are like an hour long, just remember you did it to yourself. So that was it. This is the first round of questions. If you like it, let me know. If you want to hear more of it, subscribe. Touch the little bell so you get my notifications, and leave me a comment to let me know what you want to hear more about next time. Lots of love to you guys. Again, it's Lee from straightwoo.com. See you soon. Bye.